Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Strategy, Finance and Risk, Monday, the 13th of May. Just a reminder in terms of health and safety, make your way out the back door there and we meet across the road and await instructions from staff. Remember that this meeting is being live streamed and is available publicly on YouTube. And just remember to turn your phones on to mute or off. Now we have already had a meeting today and opened with a karakia, so I don't think we need to have another one. And we have apologies, please. So I think we have Wayne Belby's apology. What about Te Pio? Have we heard from Te Pio? Okay. So someone move. Thank you, Shad and Bill. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. No one's booked for public forum. We don't have any late items. We don't have any confidential business to be transferred into open, and I'm not aware of any change to the order of business. That brings us to the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of March. Very ably chaired by Wayne for most of it. The LAP. He enjoyed that. So any corrections, any questions relating to that? Someone like to move that it was a true and correct record. Stephen, thank you. And Bruce, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. That brings us to the Urban Design Action and Investment Plan. Carl is coming up to talk to that. Morning. Afternoon.
Afternoon. Yes, afternoon, everyone. I'll give a brief overview. Okay. Look, I'll take the report largely as read, and the Urban Design Action Investment Plan document is read as well. So this Urban Design Action and Investment Plan replaces our 2006 Urban Design Strategy, and it provides an action plan to support Council's role in design leadership and supporting design excellence as our city continues to grow. Through the process, we've undertaken engagement with key built environment stakeholders, including Tauranga City Council teams, professional bodies, kaupapa Māori design experts, Te Rangapu Mana Whenua, government agencies, and also working with our Tauranga Urban Design Panel for their inputs. So as I say, that it really is focused on around design leadership, so such as communicating the value of urban design, leading by examples in the projects and the mahi that council does, and promoting good urban design outcomes in city planning and projects. It's also focused, and the actions are focused on design excellence, so providing clear urban design direction and guidance, promoting elements such as safety and accessibility through all our design, supporting vibrant, livable communities, and so forth. Importantly, it is an important tool to anchor and support good urban design outcomes for our city, and it also helps to anchor our urban design panel in place. And this is in the context of probably acknowledging that our city plan to date has had limited focus on urban design, and we're currently continuing to build that into our city plan going forward. So I won't go through all the actions, but again, they really do relate to promoting that leadership and excellence. Some of those actions are specifically about improving our policy as it grows. Some are about providing guidance internally to our own teams to lead by example, and there's other actions in there to support our community, developers, and other key stakeholders in delivering as we move forward. And probably last but not least, we know this is a collaborative effort. We can't do it by ourselves. So a strong part of, moving forward is working with both tangata whenua and our community on projects as we move forward. So happy to take any questions about the Action Investment Plan.
Any questions, comments? Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. And I must admit, I think this is a really important initiative. Getting urban design right is fundamental to a successful city. And I guess when I'm looking at this, I sort of wear my former city jurisdiction on my shoulders, i.e. Auckland, which I think has failed miserably in terms of integrating good urban design. I come from the relatively new parts of Auckland City, Karaka, prior to my shift down south. And not far away from there is Tamaki, East Tamaki, Flatbush, and Manukau, where there are kind of exemplars of how not to do urban design. And my worry is that I'm seeing bits of that here in Tauranga as well, particularly when I go out and I see narrow gutted little streets with houses cheek by jowl with very little green space, and cars parked on booms and footpaths because there was no provision for that in the urban design. A lack of public transport provision to service quite intense by New Zealand standards urban development. So when I came to this report, I was expecting to find some examples or some clear policy statements about what good urban design for Tauranga would look like. And I can see that in the action. So I'm really happy that it's in the action. But I think, to me, we need to move from talking at a very high level about, we all say we want good urban design, but I've yet to actually come across anyone who's defined in kind of visual terms or planning terms what that looks like. And I think if there's a role to be had for our urban design panel, working in partnership as the plan sets out with all of the various stakeholders, it would be to create some exemplars of what good urban design looks like. And there may well be examples across the city that can be used as real life case studies, because I think that's how you bring reality to the aspiration. I find the report quite aspirational, and it's quite theoretical, and I'd really like to see the development of the policy that makes it operational and deliverable. And the other area that I felt that it could do with some more focus is in thinking about the people who are going to be living in the places that we're designing for and how the urban design will meet their needs. And I'll give you a little bit of example. I mean, a lot of the areas that are developing not so well in Auckland are largely populated by immigrants into the city. They're often multi-generational families living in a large home on a small little postage stamp sections, which means they have adults, another family and teenagers, almost all of whom have a car because the public transport service doesn't work for them because of multifarious destinations they're going to. And you see those houses with cars stacked cheek by jowl in the two-space driveway that they have with the single garage that's been provided, which is not used for storing the car, it's used for storing all of the furniture that they can't fit into their house. And then sprawling out over onto the booms and the streets and indeed the parks that are supposed to be there for leisure. And that just drives me crazy when I see that ill-fitting kind of urban design in terms of meeting the needs of the people who are going to live there. So that's some of the flavour that I'm hopeful that when we start the action side of this plan that we really do address. I think there's a critical need for that to be done well, and I'd love Tauranga to be an exemplar of that, not a follower of really poor design that we see in other cities. This is my speech, but I think it's a really important issue.
Just following on, and I think the opportunity perhaps for the engagement with the urban design panel actually to perhaps work through or help develop some of those exemplars or some of those situations that exhibit good urban design, because we've got some very capable people around that wider urban design panel. So it's actually from not just here, but from the Upper North Island. So the opportunity in terms of actually using some of that expertise and thinking and experience to help also. And I'm quite happy to, got the microphone on to move the recommendations, Chair.
I'm happy to second the recommendation as well. And I did provide some comment back to Carl on some of the earlier iterations. Probably the area that kind of stuck out to me, that I provided some feedback on, that I thought there was an absence of, was really around kind of our built heritage, and the lack of it, I think, particularly around our city, over the last probably 30 or 40 years. A lot of that old heritage is now gone. And what we do have left, we do need to look after and protect. And then how that's integrated into the wider, into our wider kind of network, and within communities. So yeah, I think that's quite an important area. I mean, the other area is, and we're doing quite well, I suppose, is the recognition of cultural elements in design, and how we reflect that in the urban form. But we also need to be mindful of our built heritage at the same time.
Thanks, Cal. Sorry, I'm of course a non-planner and an accountant, so that probably means my question is an ignorant one. I get the idea, and I got the leadership and the design excellence. Makes a lot of sense, and Stephen, take on board your points. I don't want to call out councils, but I can think of one down south where your description would exactly fit what I see down south as well. You know where I come from. Carl, what adds real bite to this? I mean, I take Stephen's point. There's a level of aspiration, and I recognise we need to be organised and something that's an umbrella. When does this really start to have effect and bite? Is it only through city plan changes, or where does it start to turn the dial for us?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple elements, and it's probably kind of starting today that we've now got an action plan in front of us, and we've got to proactively move forward with all of those actions that we said we'd do. So if you take each action in isolation, you're probably not going to achieve a lot. But if we get on with all of those actions, I think it starts responding to the comments we're hearing today. So there is the need to get up exemplars. There is the need to be talking with our community and key stakeholders and actually working with them to get those exemplars, ones that they understand, buy into, and we can put back onto the table for wider developers. But it also is around having the teeth to move some of this forward. There's the carrot and stick approach, where we can certainly take many people forward with the carrot, but on occasion we need that stick to get good outcomes. So the city plan is definitely part of that, and so Plan Change 38, our business plan change, will play a role in that moving forward. And we also need to be looking at how we use the urban design panel, our existing rule frameworks around residential and so forth to moving it forward. Probably the other comment I'd add, we need to be thinking about urban design at all scales. So when we're at that macro scale, designing new areas, new suburbs and so forth, it's about getting the bones right and then working down and applying urban design at all layers to get those outcomes we're looking for.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Carl. It's helpful.
So I guess I'm a bit with Stephen that I think this is, whilst this is pretty aspirational, it's also very high level. And we've had these conversations before on a number of occasions. So we're guided by, we're constricted by legislation. So we can't require people to have car parks, but we know that people are going to have cars. So in our design, we should be taking account of if we can't have them in people's houses, what are we doing to provide some of that parking in our design? And I visited some people over the weekend where there was, you sort of come up the hill and there's a a roundabout at the top, and there's parking in there for visitors, and obviously for the extra cars that some of those houses have. And it's sort of accepting that that's the way people are. They're going to be, even if they use public transport or different modes to go to and from work, they will still have a car that they use on occasions. And then it's thinking about some of the things we've been talking about along Cameron Road, where people are gathering. We need shade. More and more we need shade, but we also need to have a lot of deciduous trees so that there is light during the winter, and the footpaths in those areas don't get damp and stuff. So it's a lot of that sort of stuff that we've already had discussions about. But I guess that's the detail that's underneath this, and that's my worry, is that this is all still very high level. But where do we get down to the actual? What does it look like for people? And I just recall that conversation that we had a couple of weeks ago with that transport corridor to Tumu, that actually designed a transport corridor, and there was just green fields on either side of it, despite the fact we knew that there were going to be quite a lot of people living alongside that transport corridor. So how does all that fit together? And again, I didn't really see that here in the detail. I know the urban design panel, are people that are working in this all the time. But I've also seen around the country and even in this city developing, some pretty ordinary suburbs that are not necessarily great. And every time when I go home at night, I turn the corner and there's a house that has a tree outside of it, and in that tree are 3 swings of different types, and there's always kids playing. It's not a park, but it's a bit of green space that's been created on a corner, and a tree's been planted there. And I think the parents have put the swings up, but it's that sort of little details that make that street livable for the kids that are living there. It's always about 7 or 8 kids hanging around. It's fantastic. So I'm hoping that underneath this, there's that sort of thinking going on about how do we make urban design. I know urban design is a term, but actually it's about creating places for people to live. And too often we talk at that high level, but don't really understand from the people. So I would have liked to have seen you perhaps go out to a couple of suburbs and talk to people about, is it good in that area? How could it improve in that area? And I think some of that sort of work might help inform good urban design. So going to a suburb and saying to people, what is it about your suburb that you think is good? Is it good design? Is it poor design? What would add to it? Not in a big spatial plan way, but in a small way, so that we get that flavour from people as they live closer and closer together. I could hear next door's heat pump turn off this morning. I mean, people are living really closely together. So how do we make that much more livable, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Look, and there's obviously a lot to unpack there, but I guess a key action within this is that we want to build urban design and have urban design input into all of our key projects, and that's really important. And as an organisation, we need to buy into that. So one of our actions is about setting ourselves up to be able to do that by having the briefs in place and the expectations at a project management level of incorporation of urban design, because urban design by nature is multidisciplinary, and it is about bringing together the transport, the land use, the parks and all that. And I guess building, and leading on to your comments is, if we've got the urban designers at the table and we've got that as an important part of our these projects, then we can start that process of talking with the community and drawing those aspects in. But yeah, totally agree with all of what you've said is important to get the best outcomes.
I think we see them coming through the action. So exactly what you're saying is what we're envisaging. It's sort of like a layer below. So this provides the strategic direction, but also if you approve it, it is the approved policy direction that then we can lever off, because at the moment that doesn't exist. And so it's really hard to argue internally, actually, this needs to be given priority and it's important. Once this is adopted, that's in place, and things like Action 13 establish guidance to support high quality public spaces in the streets. Then there's another one further down which addresses the issues that you're just talking about around incorporation into public and private projects, walkways, appropriate planting, seating, all those things. So what we didn't want to do was to have this effectively just sort of sitting in the planning part of the business and not being driven into the design and actual construction part of the business. So once we have this direction, then we'll develop those guidance, work together with them in terms of on the ground application, and then seek to have it embedded in what we do on a regular basis. And it will flow through into reviews of the infrastructure development code, our street design guidelines, all of those sorts of things, because that's where staff will go to when they want guidance about actually what's the way we do stuff around here.
Just add one more comment there, is that we've got staff names against all of those actions. So there is ownership internally, and we will champion this to take those actions forward.
Any other comments? All right, so it's been moved and seconded. Put it, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thanks, Carl. Natural hazard and resilience planning and the release of that coastal flooding. I think Wally's going to talk to that.
Chair, I think we'll just take it as read. It's just a presentation, an update of where we're at with the planning for natural hazards and resilience planning. There's no recommendations other than to receive the report.
Just receiving it. So it's just work that's ongoing, work alongside the Regional Council.
Western Bay Regional Council and us, yes, and over the next 12 months we'll be going through some further engagement starting later this year.
Any questions for Wally on it? Shad.
So I'll just make a comment. Thanks, Wally, for the report. I mean, I sometimes jump onto the mapping, the website as well, and just have a quick look around. You know, if we're talking about key projects and trying to understand, I suppose, what the hazard risks are in those locations. So it's a great tool, and appreciate the work that the council's doing in that space to make sure we've got accurate information to be able to plan over the next 10, 20, 30 years, how we develop and where we grow. So the information, I think, is really important for our community to understand, I suppose, what the risks are, the current risks in terms of where we live, but also how we develop in the future.
And directing people, if they're interested, to that website that's listed there. Okay, good. Shared moving. Matere is happy to second. Any other questions, comments? No? All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much, Wally. Plan change 38. Business land framework. Janine coming to the table.
Kia ora tātou. If it's helpful to the committee, would you like a brief overview of how we plan to approach Plan Change 38?
I think it would be helpful.
Not a problem. So in December last year, the Strategy, Finance and Risk Committee provided direction to staff to project plan and start planning for a future plan change. We have named that Plan Change 38, Business Land Framework, and the purpose is to do a comprehensive review of our business lands, our commercial and industrial zones. I've set out in the report a lot of the key drivers, which was also set out, and probably won't go back over those. But in terms of the kind of the key objectives that we are wanting to achieve through this plan change is to really provide for and implement a range of commercial and industrial zones. So at the moment within the plan, we have quite a flat structure. We don't provide very clear role and function of our centres, and we have a real lack of commercial hierarchy. So that's one key objective. Another key objective is to look at and ensure that we have appropriate supply across the city. So that's supply of our commercial land and our industrial land, and that's to meet our requirements of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. but also to make sure that our suburbs have sufficient land within that suburb. So, you know, for example, local or neighbourhood centres where people are easily able to walk to those daily needs. And then the third objective is really to make sure that we're having a well-functioning urban environment. So we are proposing for this plan change to not just look at the zones for commercial industrial, but also look at all the other supporting matters such as transport, noise and signage that are an important part of these zones as well. So we propose to look at those. So this is a significant plan change for Tauranga City Council. It is significant in its importance, but in terms of its scale. So we propose to cut this into a number of what we've called work streams. So the first two work streams work really closely together. So they will be looking at the spatial extent of our zones. So where these zones are located, working with work stream 2, which will also be basically drafting and preparing the toolbox of zones, so all the provisions. So important components of that is things like reverse sensitivity. So the Mount Industrial area will be a key component of that work stream. So looking at what is the appropriate zone within that industrial area, as well as what are the appropriate provisions for that industrial area. So that's an example, but we have a number of other conflicts across the city that we'll need to look at as part of those work streams. The third work stream is transport. So our transport provisions within the plan for business zone land is really, it's not fit for purpose. So we're looking at doing quite a comprehensive review to make sure that we have appropriate bicycle parking requirements, end-of-trip facilities, but also looking at things like trip generation. So for those big trip generating activities, when do we need to trigger the need for a resource consent to look at what the effects are on the wider network? And then work stream 4 and 5 is looking at district-wide matters. So as I said, noise, signage, light, all of those activities that are influenced within those zones, as well as subdivision. And then the last component is urban design. So as Carl Luca was speaking earlier, one of the key actions that come out of the investment plan is having appropriate urban design matters within the city plan or other mechanisms to ensure that you're getting good urban design outcomes within our commercial zones. And then in terms of timeframes for all of these work streams, they'll all work in unison, in parallel. This year is very much around research, information gathering, understanding our issues, and starting our technical work. So there is a large portion of technical work that's required across the different disciplines as our evidence base to progress the plan change, which will take the majority of this year. Along with that, we will also be doing engagement throughout the process. So obviously this first year, we are looking at internal and external workshops to understand issues and starting looking at options to resolve those issues. So that's the bulk of this year. And then going into early next year is when we are planning to go back to whatever the relevant committee is within council to seek direction on some of those key strategic matters. So we'll be proposing to take up option papers and discussion papers to get direction from council as we progress through the plan change. And that will give us the direction to be able to start drafting all of our provisions, preparing all our section 32A, wrapping up all of our technical work, and then moving on to formal notification of the plan change in the following year, so in early 2026. Coming back to that communications and engagement, we will also, 2025, will be working with all our key stakeholders, general comms and community engagement in terms of preparing the provisions. And we also plan to send out a full set of draft provisions for tangata whenua engagement as well as key holder and community engagement before we seek to notify the plan change, which will be quite a significant step. So that's a brief overview and I'm happy to take any questions.
complicated process. But I think this came to our attention when we were doing Plan Change 33, the fact that the city didn't have even a commercial hierarchy, so there was no clear, well, there wasn't a hierarchy, but it wasn't even clear what the function and purpose of some of those smaller centres was, and so that made it quite a lot of work done earlier on for Plan Change 33. So this was identified then as a big piece of work that we felt needed to be made for the city. I was waiting for the planners to make some comment. Bill.
Thanks, Chair. I support the direction of the report and the recommendations, and particularly just following on the conversation around the commercial hierarchy. And Janine's touched on in terms of the well-functioning urban environments. And I think where we are sitting, and not so much this building, but in the city centre, I think is a good example that the city centre over a long period of time has suffered because there was no clarity or indeed a commercial or business hierarchy in place. So really key elements of having such a hierarchy in place has been very clear on the role and function, whether it's the city centre, maybe some of those commercial areas along Cameron Road, the Mount, Papamoa, etc. And that's important in terms of in terms of the investment required, B, in terms of giving certainty in terms of the nature and scale of activities to be encouraged or attracted to those particular areas. C, in terms of then ensuring that leakage doesn't occur, perhaps say into a general industrial zone of a whole lot of retail activities that should be more appropriately in the city centre or some of the suburban centres. So I'm really supportive of that, Chair. My probably bit of advice, and staff have probably well picked this up, don't underestimate though the value of actually having a solid evidence base in terms of development of that commercial business hierarchy, because there will be a lot of interest in that from very large firms to very small ones. And I think that evidence base is actually fundamental of actually then successfully, hopefully, defending whatever the position is in terms of the having that hierarchy in place, but then B, successfully implementing it. So I think I move. I'm with an addition, Chair, and that's B, Roman numeral 3, after the word roles, including a commercial hierarchy. I just wanted to make it clear that that's the direction, that's part of the direction of the plan change.
And you're moving that. Okay. Anyone prepared to second that? Shared with the addition? Yeah. Bruce, did you you want to speak to it? No, Bruce.
Question if I could, Janine. My attention, again, treating where angels, I don't know, somebody, whatever the right analogy is.
Treading where angels fear to tread.
That's right. I don't know whether I could count myself as one or not, and probably not. Paragraph 18 interests me because it's where these are always good little additions to our report. We say the scale of this project presents several critical risks. And I think the nature of what I've read and heard in the discussion, those are probably as much strategic risks as they are operational risks. So my first question is, how are we going to govern those risks? And the second one then is, I'm really interested in the final sentence of that paragraph. It says this can realistically only be achieved through a full through a full city plan review. So I'm just interested, because of my ignorance, about the difference between a plan change and a full plan review. I suspect they're different in which case, why would, I mean, I think I know what I'm asking here, but why are we dealing with a plan change when in fact we need a full city plan review?
So to answer your first question in terms of the governance, so how we at a staff level we have a project steering group that has a number of general managers and managers across the organisation. So that's our governance group that we report back to monthly, and within those we are required to report back on any critical risks and in terms of how we're going to manage those critical risks. So that's how we do it internally in terms of managing them. And then I would say the critical risks that we have identified are risks that are very much a watching brief. So for one, the resource management reforms, we had a change in government, which has provided us with a very much I would say uncertainty for policy staff in terms of knowing timeframes, what changes are going to be made and how that's going to impact on our plan changes. It impacted on our full review 2 or 3 years ago, and we kind of feel a little bit like we're back at square one in that respect. In terms of that last sentence, it is very much tied to what we call the National Planning Standards. So the National Planning Standards are a legislative requirement in the Resource Management Act, and it requires council to have a set structure. So they must be laid out all the same, and also use the definitions set out in the National Planning Standards, and also apply the zone titles and colours. So it's very much the look and feel of a district plan or city plan rather than the content of that city plan. The issue is that we haven't, we're yet to implement those national planning standards. The structure of those national planning standards are very different and the definitions are very different. And if we're to take make those changes in terms of the structure and definitions at an ad hoc, so if we're going to do it by plan change, it really it creates some real complexities for staff because there's all the flow and effects to other chapters in the plan, because as you can appreciate, all the chapters are linked in some way. So if the national planning standards are to remain as a mandatory requirement, which we're required to implement for any plan change going forward, it is going to create a logistical nightmare, if I may, in terms of how we are going to implement those requirements. And the most logical way for council to do that would actually be to say we need to look at all of the chapters, bring all of the chapters into the right format, right, using the right definitions, labels and things, rather than do it for just the commercial and industrial land. So if we're to do it separately and just for those two zones, it will be, in my view, it would be very, very confusing for the reader, because it will just look so different. And so that is one of the critical issues that we are following up quite strongly with central government to ensure that they understand those complexities that I think it's more than half the councils in New Zealand are currently facing.
That's really helpful, and you've probably given me a bit of a 101, so I appreciate that. And I get now the link between the first sentence and the last sentence via the RMA changes. I guess I was being a wee bit naughty in talking about strategic versus operational risk. I think ultimately, as we go out of business and an elected council come in, we need to think about actually how those strategic risks to be reported to some form of council going forward. And I would suspect, given the importance of this, the answer must be yes. But of course, that's to be determined as you go forward. So thank you.
Any other questions? Comments? No? Okay. All right. So we're receiving the report approving the proposed Plan Change 38 Business Land Framework objectives, giving effect to the NPSUD to provide sufficient business land, developing strategic objectives and policies for the sustainable and integrated management of commercial and industrial land, and establishing a range of commercial and industrial zones, and we're adding in there including a commercial hierarchy. And we're noting that you'll be bringing regular updates. Oh, she's gone. Back to the relevant committee as the plan change, because it is quite a long process. So you'll need to be getting guidance from the council. Yep. Okay. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. It's a big piece of work that's going to occupy a lot of resource of the council, but has to be done. Okay, procurement policy review. Alistair, that's you.
Thank you. While Vicky and Angela are making their way up, inflation changes the cost of things. The value of a golden kiwi versus a lottery ticket these days indicates that when we spend 300,000, 500,000, we don't always get what we used to have. So as part of a refresh of our procurement policy, we want to highlight some changes to the way that the chief executive will be able to make decisions without coming back to council because the value of money has changed.
Just going to take the report as read. Just to add to what Alistair was saying, the capital programme when Commission came in was around about 179 million and we're now at 367. And staff are having to deliver at speed or at pace while still getting good value for money for the ratepayers, but also a quality product. So we're trying to balance between the paperwork and what these guys need to do on the ground. So the first one I wanted just to briefly talk to was lifting certain procurement limits within the policy. The first one being the value at which a procurement plan has to be documented and signed off by the procurement team, senior managers, etc. Currently, it's at 100,000. It's been at that probably since 2009. So we've moved on a wee bit. So the proposal is to take that up to 250,000. It doesn't mean that people don't, how do I put this? It doesn't mean that people can't fill one in if they want to for their thinking, but they don't have to have it signed by procurement. And the second one was the lifting of the chief executive's delegation in relation to improving an exemption to open competition. We looked at, surveyed other councils and we were quite far behind in our delegations. We've pegged it similarly to Hamilton being a similar size council. And the proposal is to move the chief executive's delegation from 500,000 to 3 million and to then create a new category for our general managers so they can approve between 250,000 and 500,000. There are a number of other small clarifications in recommendations 4 to 8, and the last one was just around we're clarifying that the development agreements don't fall within the procurement policy scope. Questions?
Thank you. It's amazing how far we are behind some of those other larger cities. Amazing. Hastings District at 10 million. Wow. That's a lot. Yes, Bruce. You will have
I was
come
going to
across
ask,
this.
obviously, Marty, you're happy at 3. You probably don't want more than 3.
Typically, just because you've got the delegated authority doesn't mean to say that you always exercise it. So sometimes there are good reasons not to.
No, look, I think it's a good, sensible number, although actually it was interesting to read this because I have engagement with some of these. I haven't quite realised the number. So there we go. So thank you for that. That's really, I think 3 is a good number and I have no trouble. And with the idea that inflation's picked us up, it makes sense. And I like the fallback. And just a couple of questions about your what you were saying were your minor ones. I was interested in this, clarify that to achieve public value, council will monitor the performance of suppliers to ensure they are delivering unexpected outcomes. I was interested in that one. Is that actually so that we can do some form of internal audit or check? We can look at information, otherwise it's confidential to check things out. Is this to inform the supplier, or is it just saying from a good procurement policy process, we're going to do this internally?
just noticed that the policy was silent on the matter when in fact the procurement manual does talk about how to manage suppliers through the both, because procurement covers both the, you know, initial procurement policy and the delivery of the service or good. And so we just wanted to make sure that the policy reflected what staff were actually doing in practice in terms of managing that life cycle of the procurement.
Just wondering whether there was any privacy or confidentiality or records issue there that was behind that. That's no worries. Hey, look, and just I think I understand it, but what it's essentially policy clause 6.25, which was the council by resolution can set targets and mandatory requirements for procurement. Is this sort of things like social procurement or something like that? What can you give me an example of what that actually would do?
Yeah, so I think it was last October, council actually approved for broader outcomes that we could have 5% of it's not total spend, but spend that is under our control to be awarded to Māori and Pacifica organisations, and that there should be 10% weighting when we actually go to market.
Gotcha.
So rather than every time we want to look at changing, hopefully to increase these over time, we don't need to bring it back to policy to be able to do that.
Brilliant. Okay, look, that's good. That's very helpful. And if it's helpful, I'm prepared to move these recommendations.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Bruce. Bill, you seconding? It's interesting to see the modern slavery one, which is becoming more and more important to our procurement policies as, and you've made the distinction between employment standards and modern slavery. They're two distinctive breaches, if you like. But yeah, it's interesting to see that that's becoming more and more common. Any other comments? Were you going to? Did you want to ask? Go.
Kia ora. Yeah, that just kind of piqued my interest seeing that there and in the definition and both in the recommendation. But I was just wondering if you have an example of what that would look like and how that would come to your attention.
Yes, so this was highlighted by our risk team, given that there's an action plan and legislation that was progressing prior to the change in government looking at these issues. And so depending on what the situation was, potentially you'd be going to different authorities and that will be set out in the procurement manual for staff in terms of what that looks like. But in terms of the difference between modern slavery and a breach of employment standards, I guess a breach of employment standards might be, say, withholding wages that were due to someone, therefore they can't leave their employment, whereas modern slavery, I guess, is in that more extreme kind of situation where someone may be forced into a situation through immigration reasons or where it's a little bit more difficult, I guess, a bit more complex over and above just like withholding wages or annual leave or entitlements. So I guess just making sure that both are flagged, but there's a different pathway for the two different potential issues.
And often during your procurement process, particularly with some of our overseas suppliers, there is now, quite a lengthy process to go through to be able to be assured that you're not then procuring a product that has been obtained through modern slavery practices. So that's becoming more and more common, as it's also becoming more and more common with our exports that we show how that is, what that supply chain looks like. Be right?
Yes, but we are saying that reactively, if we become aware of it, we will alert the appropriate authorities, as opposed to within the bill they propose certain agencies were required to act proactively go through the value chain.
Any other comments, questions? No? So it's been moved and seconded. Quite a long list, but I think the significant one is that we're lifting that those requirements at the tier 3 or above for the documented process and lifting the amount from 100 to 250,000. And we're lifting the chief executive's delegation up to 3 million. All right, I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Wave 3 of the residents' survey. Jeremy, it's a pretty small cohort, and it's pretty disappointing to see 3/4 of them didn't know we had a commission. I don't know where you found these people, but however. So, did you want to make some opening comments
No,
after
only
that?
very briefly. This is the third of 4 waves. The cohort intention is 600 over the year, and we split it up into 4 tranches of roughly 150 each time, so that we don't end up surveying 600 people in one day, which might just be the day after good news or bad news about council. So we just try and spread the issue across the year. The results are what they are. Wave on wave, they're a bit up from wave 2 this year. Year on year, they're a bit down from last year. Both changes largely within the margin of error for most items.
So we're slightly up on the number of people that are unaware from last year, they're unaware that we have a commission in place rather than a council, but they're not very happy with what we're doing anyway. I guess is what you could take from it, Stephen.
Yeah, I think it just underlines how long and how deep you have to communicate what's actually happening, and that much of the sentiment is driven through perception, and it takes a long time for perception to change. So we'll have to watch over time how this now trends.
But I think also it is affected by what's affecting you. So if something's happening that you're involved in, you're much more aware of the council than if it's just your daily, it's just there. And not many people value, I think, the vast myriad of services that local government provides on a daily basis. Anyone got any other questions, comments? No? Someone like to move that we receive the wave 3 of the annual residents. Stephen. Thank you. Rohario, thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Lagoima and privacy report, 3rd quarter. Okay.
Good afternoon. Nothing terribly exciting to report in this report. Numbers are still going up slightly each quarter. But what is really pleasing is that the number of days to actually get them resolved is reducing. So that's good. We've got busier, but we've got faster. So we had a couple of 2 more ombudsman investigations come through this quarter as well. So we've got 4 or 6 active ones at the moment. We haven't got any of the previous quarter ones resolved yet. So those are probably the highlights. CCTV footage, I think I talked about that last time. So that makes Nick look even busier than he really is. Well, no, sorry, I don't mean that. Of course you're very busy. Let me take that back, rephrase that. But we do all that work for Nick's team on behalf of TTOC. So yes. Any questions?
The ombudsman's one, you've got.
Oh, sorry, that number in there is wrong. That's the last quarter.
That's the last quarter.
2 new ones this quarter.
And the 4 that remain open from the last quarter, are they still under investigation, or are we just waiting a decision?
We're in regular communications with them. So Nick's team's got one that we're going backwards and forwards with and providing information to them to help them with their investigation. So we just have to wait.
Yeah. And you're expecting it to get busier as we get closer to the election and candidates. So a lot of them for information.
Well, it's interesting. We've had a couple, but I wouldn't say that's the vast. It's more about you, the commission, you generally, But so I'm hoping that number might go down. But then it'll ramp up again. So we might have this nice little lull. But yeah, and it's things that are making the front page of the newspaper are often what we get legumes about. But there's no real consistency in what people are interested in. They'll see a headline and like to write to us about it. So yeah.
All right. Other questions?
Oh, please, no.
Okay, thank you. Would someone like to move that we receive that report? Bill, thank you. And Bruce, second. Thank you very much. Thanks, Kath. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Health and safety report.
I'd just like to take a minute to introduce Rich May and Jan Peterson from our People, Performance and Culture team to walk us through this quarter's report.
Ora tātou. Thanks for having us. We just want to point out the thanks to the Commission and to the exec in terms of the support for the safety program throughout the quarter. We had 15 due diligence visits, so that's really pleasing. Really pleased with how our incident report is tracking in terms of what has been reported, which is of a low severity nature, which is pleasing. So thank you. And I'm just going to hand over to Rich, who's just going to take us through one of the key projects, which is the skate park.
Really pleased to see the Destination Skate Park coming to a close with an opening on the 29th of this month. Quite a complex project for us to undertake. The health and safety risk assessments that were carried out on up front for this project were very comprehensive, and we're really pleased to be able to deliver this to the general public without any major incidents to report.
Done well. Now the next lot of health and safety starts once it's open. Okay, so I opened up for questions, but I just wanted on your first page, you've got for quarter 3 is up security, trespass, criminal activity, terrorism, damage. That's up from 8 to 21. Is it all of the above, or it is all of those, or is there one or two of those more than the others? Surely we don't have a lot of terrorism.
It's a bit of a mixture, predominantly through the libraries, through our parking teams, and generally
harassment,
unwanted behaviour.
It's sad to see that that's happening more and more throughout our communities, and that our staff have to cope with that. What about hitting into stationary object?
They're motor vehicle minor offences. I think they've gone up a little bit with the city ops team now in operation.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Any questions? Pretty comprehensive report. No questions? No? Someone like to move then that we receive that health and safety report for the third quarter? Martiri? Stephen, thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Quarterly financial reporting, monitoring report for the 9 months to 31st of March 2024. Catherine?
Good afternoon. I also have Susan Braid here with us to answer any questions there might be about capital budget adjustments. There's been a lot of work in that space. Right, so the report for the first 9 months is summarised in the Statement of Comprehensive Revenue Expense and some associated tables in Attachment 1. There's a lot of numbers and a lot of complexity underlying it. So I'd say first that in terms of our rate funding and user fee funded activities, we're tracking overall well to budget. We've got some overs and some unders. We did call out there is a potential risk that sits particularly around interest rates. They're staying higher for longer. So while in that first 9 months, we've managed to offset the higher interest costs by higher interest on deposits, as that cash runs down, there'll be less of an offset towards the end of the year, and a number of activities with that interest cost are rate funded. But overall, there is an unfavourable year-to-date deficit variance of 11.8 million. If you look at the first graph on page 2, paragraph 14, you'll see the budget line and the actual operating cost line, and it just kicks up in December, and that is when we loaded the revised assets into the system, so it calculates actual depreciation. Up until then, we just depreciate to budget, and that's why you start to see that move. And overall, it's 9 million ahead of budget, mainly because of the waters reval, which increased those assets so much. So normally, when there's a big reval, we don't expect to rates funded in the year that it's first applied, and we phase it in over the LTP. Personnel expenses is 2.5 million unfavourable year to date, and that's expected to continue. The actual salaries to budget are on track. So this difference is coming through capitalised salaries primarily, and a lot of that is the treatment of our digital. So when we budgeted, we thought that those digital projects were all capital, and so we capitalised, but under the accounting treatment, they now come into operational treatment. So we are keeping a close eye on personnel expenses. That's a very active program of managing that, and we are aiming to come as close to budget as we can overall. So for the full year, again, there's an unfavourable variance to budget, and that's outlined in paragraph 15. About 12 million of it will be that depreciation difference. About 9.3 million will be items that were carried forward to this year. So we actually collected rates or funding for them last year, and that's things like the Bay Oval grants, things that didn't happen last year. And then we have Tauranga West Work and Digital, which are some of the complicated things that make that income statement less clear than it might otherwise be, because they're really of an capital nature, but we're having to flow the costs through, so that accounts for about 15 million of that difference. So apologies that makes it harder to understand, but that's where we are. Operating revenues, we have a couple of favourable rates results in our targeted rates area, so they are ring-fenced rates that will be within that activity. One is water by metre, and one is at waste collection. I think what else should I add? Development contributions, there has been a slowdown, and that's reflected in revenue, and that also affects our debt position because that's cash. And then capital, we've delivered 280 against a budget of 310 year to date, and are expecting to finish the year around 395 to 400 million. And if you include those operational projects of a capital nature like digital and Tauranga West, it's up to 435. And then there is a second graph, which may be a little bit complicated, but it's trying to summarise the revised budget and capital. So we very actively manage the capital program to ensure we deliver, and that means that we carry forward projects that are underway but not finished into the year, and we will look at revising or deferring projects that are for some reason delayed. So that basically that graph is saying we carried forward or added to the budget 100 million, but we revised down or deferred by 100 million, and those items came through council, and then there have been additional budgets on existing projects, new projects, and items brought forward from later years. And again, most of those have come through council. Some have come through under CE delegation, which he has to actively manage the program. So if you've got any questions on any of that, we have Susan here who has a much better handle on that. Overall, we expect our net debt position at year end to be about 70 million above budget, with some of those overspends and unbudgeted land purchases, most of which we'll bring forwards from later years. Happy to take questions.
Who's got a question? It's pretty, well, sounds complicated, but it is quite straightforward. Well, it's a good report because you've answered all the questions. All right. So I need someone then to move that we receive the quarterly financial. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you. And Stephen seconded that. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. All right. Yeah. So we've got the capital program. Is that right?
We do. James Woodward sends his apologies, but I think as the team makes their way up, we can put the slides up and we'll make a start on slide 3. Yep. There, yes, we just head straight there. The story of the end of financial quarter 3 is that if you look at the revised annual budget, Catherine touched upon these values too, of 471 in the top right-hand corner, and the actuals with 3 months left to go, there's approximately 200 million of underspend to get through in 3 months. So at forecast rates, we're not going to hit where we thought we'd get to, and the red line indicates where the project teams indicate they will get to. That's a lot of spending to do in 90 days. So there is, from experience, we know there's every year we get bigger and bigger and bigger. 380 to 400 may be where we land in practice.
Yeah.
All right, if you turn the page, we can have a look at the first team. That's Mike.
Good afternoon. So the first page for me is around the budget. So we could please turn to that page. You'll see there's one item in red there. We had an $18 million budget within this financial year for 403 Cameron Road. We have issued out an LOI to the contractor to pre-purchase the sprung floor, and so that's why we
LOI?
A letter of intent for them to pre-purchase materials. Otherwise, the other project where we have miscalculated the forecasting has been on the 90 Devonport Road project, and we've had a couple of projects on the waterfront that are slightly behind schedule. So the playground, as you know, should have been coming out of been in construction by now, but there was delayed. We go over the page now to the next area. So all of these projects, apart from the Memorial Park Aquatic Centre, are within scope on cost and time. The Central Library, things are happening really quickly there. The wrap piles have now been completed. We have the building consent for the in-ground services, the foundation and the structure, which is currently underway. And we have just received the tender for the architectural package for that building, which is currently going through a detagging and an assessment with the QS. The civic furrow, if you drove past the site this morning, you would have seen that along Harrington Street, a lot of the trees have now been removed over the weekend, and we have completed the water main relocation, and the sheet piling will be commencing within the coming weeks. The Civic Administration building is going really well. We are up to level 4 with the fit out, and they've just recently completed the concrete roof on the building. And you will have noticed that on Friday they've actually closed the facade through all the way to the 8th floor. You received your papers on the Memorial Park Aquatic Centre this morning, and the Cameron Road courts are going well. We're just waiting to lodge the building consent, and then we take over the building on the 1st of June. Go to the next page, please. So again, we just go through the risks and the opportunities, increased cost escalation. What we're hearing from the market is that prices are coming back, trades are a little less busy, and so they are looking for work, which is a good time for us to be in construction. Increased project delivery timeframes, again, consenting. We have a consenting strategy that we're working through, and whenever we do have a challenge in the consenting process, we do address that internally and resolve the issues. And again, the constraint on subcontractor market, again, that's probably 6 months ago was quite a big issue, but it's starting to appear not as great a risk to our projects. So just a couple of highlights of our projects. Next page, please. You'll see that the Strand North Reserve is progressing well. The entire seawall is now completed. All the living sea pods are in place, and it is very interesting when you go down and you get down into the water, onto the water's edge, the amount of sea life that has really moved into those pods and are making a home and a habitat in there, which is very exciting. The blue sponge is down on Beacon Wharf, so we're looking at that as well. But there's a lot of work on these pods, which has been done through the University of Waikato, their marine studies department, which is great. It's proving to be an amazing educational initiative. There's some photographs there on the fit out of 90 Devonport Road. So we're starting to put in jib lining now. All the electrical points are in, all the data points are in. When you go into the building, you can actually get the look and feel of how we're going to be operating in there in 45 weeks' time. Tongues Reserve, just the cultural lighting. Again, that's added another major attraction to the city. And then, of course, the concept plan for the new Memorial Park Aquatic Facility. Any questions in relation to those projects?
Park facility, that's That's what I was referring to. I think that concept's changed quite dramatically in the green space that we thought was there, and a half court, etc., is not in the new plans. That was the comment I made this morning.
I think Mark was saying in the render presented this morning, that piece had been cut off, but it is there and will be included.
Questions? No? Okay. Thank you. Spaces and places.
Afternoon. So lots of photos as usual. So that's some photos of some smaller projects we've got in delivery at the moment. A little court shelter that's going into Gordon Spratt Reserve, and just some of the accessibility improvements we're doing across our reserves at the moment as part of that bulk fund funding. So starting with the finances, we're doing pretty well in terms of delivery this year. So just remembering that those figures actually include the capital smoother adjustment as part of that. So that's what's shown as we've delivered beyond that capital smoother. Without that smoother in, we're looking to deliver between 85 to 90% of our capital budget this year. So we've had a pretty good year in terms of delivery. In terms of the top 5 programs that we report on as part of this, 4 out of the 5 are substantially, if not complete. So, of course, Elizabeth Street was completed this quarter and has been fully opened. Marine Parade, Coastal Walkway, that's been completed. We're just in there at the moment doing the remainder of the planting requirements and other bits and pieces we need to do for the consent. The Active Reserve Development Program, that's tracking well. The little orange there around the time is just reflecting that small delay we've had in getting underway at Gordon Spratt, but that's fully in construction now. The Kopererua Valley, we've just completed the last season of earthworks in that and opened the northern stream alignment. So again, we're just in there over winter doing the remainder of the planting, and then that project will be completed. And Omarua Falls, of course, was opened at Christmas, and just one last little piece of the puzzle there, just a small building to be constructed on site as part of the operations there. And just calling out a couple of other projects. Destination Skate Park, of course, will be opened on the 29th of May, which is pretty exciting. And yeah, the balance of that program is nearing completion. In terms of our top 3 risks, similar to what we've had previously, inflation and cost escalation is consistently putting pressure on project budgets. We have lots of cross-council project interdependencies and program dependencies that we need to work through with the wider teams. And we're currently, as a bit of an opportunity, looking at procurement methodologies with the construction partnership that we're currently in the marketplace for at the moment. Just some photos of some of the highlights. Just a refresher of what Elizabeth Street used to look like before the project started in 2018, and the decision at the time to remove the parking out the front of the Farmers Building and redevelop that area. It's good to reflect where we've come from. Just how that site's progressed with the demolition of the building and the streetscape and the Farmers complex coming to life. And the completed pictures of Maranui Lane and the blessing we had on site a couple of months ago with whare and the 2 cultural installations that have gone into the site there. Interestingly, we had comment from one of the business owners across the road, very happy to see it finished, but he said in passing, if this is what the future of the city centre is like, bring it on. Destination Skate Park, works progressed really well on site there. We've got the construction of the skate park is complete. We're just in there putting the finishing touches of the shade structures and other bits and pieces at the moment, with Kiwi Rail completing the rail crossing adjacent to the skate park. And of course, we've got the opening in everyone's diaries for the 29th of May. The Koperero stream alignment, that's just some photos from the blessing we had on site to open up the northern alignment and just some images of the defishing that went on and the team removing the various fish species from the old alignment. That old alignment's now been completely filled in and we're into planting and restoring the wetland area. And last but not least, the blessing, of course, we had on site with the commission a couple of weeks ago, where the team is standing. It's a big hole in the ground now, and the construction contractor is well into the build of that Gordon Spratt Community Sports Facility. That's everything from me.
Well done. It's a big program, big program. Any questions? No? Thanks very much. Wally.
Yes, for the waters. The revised program, we're looking to be dead on target for the revised program. It had to be revised downwards somewhat. A couple of projects running late, especially the bioreactor number 2 at Tauranga. But we're looking to hit the target now for the revised budget. Thanks.
Got better weather for it. They're not mucking around in mud.
Yeah, well, we're running ahead on a couple and behind on a big one. Yeah, not quite as well as we would have liked, but heading in the right direction now. Tauranga desludging, so that's been successfully completed, and it's good to have that pond cleaned out. So that's gone very well. And next stage of that, obviously, is finishing off the landfill at Tauranga. The bioreactor, as I alluded, that's running behind time, and we've had a few issues with that job. And we have the contractor back on site now, and they're starting to remediate some of those faulty piles. Food clarifier, that's going well. It's a little bit ahead of time, so that we're very pleased with that parcel of work. Eastern Corridor, again, there's quite a large program of work going in there for various pump stations and rising mains, and that's tracking pretty well, a little bit behind on one of those programs. And the Western Corridor, that's tracking really well. So all of our items are complete, and working with the developer on completing some of these, and also the NZTA. So it's been quite a collaborative effort there, getting that program of work complete.
Wally, just before you go off that slide, on that eastern corridor around Opal Drive, there's a couple of Maori land trusts that are developing land. You're working in concert with their timelines? Aware of that? No?
I'm not too sure about that, to be honest.
Check your emails, Wally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yeah, no, it's just a live issue at the moment. We need to make sure that the timing of the Opal Drive pump station and a private development align. So, yeah.
Thank you, will do. So risks and opportunities. There's been a lot of changes recently with the legislation around water reforms, and we're now going down the path of local water done well, and putting teams together to look at how we might be achieving that successfully for Tauranga City. The delivery panels have been stood up, so we've got a panel for consultants and a panel for contractors, and that's going quite well. We're just now getting the parcels of work through those consultants and contractors to make sure that we manage the work program well. And again, with resourcing, things went a little bit slower with the delivery panel than we would have liked, but we've got a good team of people in there, and we're bringing in some nice youth or younger graduate and junior project managers. So it's really exciting to have them on board, and that program's going really well, developing a new cadre of project managers for us. A few highlights. So the clarifier, yeah, you can see there's a lot of piling going on in there. And that big round circle in the middle, we've just installed the draft tube into that. That's a huge pipe that links back to the bioreactors. So that's just been installed today. Evans Road, we've got a few culverts that needed to be upgraded as part of our resource consents for Papamau East. Opal Drive rising main, the ground conditions there were poor, so we went for an aerial pipe, so you can see the pipeline running above the ground, which is quite unusual for rising mains. So that was attached. We built a walkway with that to provide amenity as well as a pipeline above the ground. Thank you. It's a nice asset, yes. The preload for Dam 5. So Dam 5's between Kennedy and Freeburn Road. So it's a large dam there to protect some of the downstream properties through from Freeburn Road north. So it's quite a large dam going in there. Toto Rising Main, that's in service. So that's bringing the water up from the awa to the reservoir. And then again, another culvert upgrade in Papamau, which has been completed.
Questions for Wally? Waters? Yeah, Bill?
Thanks, Chair. Wally, just in terms of the completion of the desludging, so, and I didn't quite pick it up, but I presume is that capped and then grass growing on top? I just wanted to understand what's the final stage.
For the landfill, yes.
Yes.
So we've covered over the trenches, so that they'll be left to stabilise for a while, and then some capping will go on. So there will be some consolidation of that, but yeah, it will be a grass. So we haven't come up with a final design yet, so we're looking at that at the moment. So there will be a cover put over it, generally impervious, and then grassed on top of that, so that the water sheets off it.
Anything else? No, thanks, Wally. Transport. Tom.
Good afternoon. I'm substituting for Calvin Hill, who's down south on leave this week. I'll just touch on the highlights quickly as we go through. As you can see, from Q3 is roughly 3/4 of the budget spent, with a forecast of 96% for year end. The two highlights I want to emphasise from the top 5 projects and programs slide is Arataki bus facility update from Karen Hay. That the project was released for tender on the 10th of May, and that closes on the 31st of May, with contract award intending to occur in mid-June. Staff working closely with adjacent landowners to finalise the final mitigation arrangements. So we really look forward in the very near future to that being well and truly underway. And an update on Links Ave from Kathy Grant, that the resurfacing of Links Ave is very, very close to being complete. And there is still some garden work and some cycle separators to be installed. And some work on the entrances to the football fields starting soon, I believe. The concrete road aspects and the line marking have been completed this weekend, just been. No change to risks and opportunities as provided by Kelvin. And 2 highlights: Monganui Road Stage 3, as shown, and then Cameron Road Stage 1. Some images and some commentary from the opening a few weeks ago.
Doing a good job of that spade there, Bill. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the next section. Neil, but if there are any questions in the meantime.
Just for Monganui Road outside the skate park, is that due to be completed the same time the skate park is completed?
The footpath, curb, etc. That's close to the skate park, but the rest won't be.
I think on the Monganui Road.
Yeah, all up, where it's completion in springtime, so they'll keep working on it over winter.
So
Tim.
Yeah. Cameron Road Stage 1. So what we're seeing there now is sort of tidy up work. Spaces and places are going in and adding to the gardens. But it's quality work, is it? Is that right? Is that what we've got?
Yeah, so there's some defect work still going on. So you'll see crews coming out from time to time and putting up a few cones and patching up concrete and curbs and that sort of thing. So that's still ongoing, but very close to have those defects completed.
And we've got three of the artworks in Cameron Road Stage 1 and the fourth one going out for tender. Is that right? Okay. Thanks, Tom.
The largest deviation in the cash management is based on Tauranga West this period. We're behind where we expected to be in terms of the contractors starting. To resolve that, winter earthworks consent has been granted, and we're working with them at the moment in terms of an alternative material in order to give them program security. There is a cost to that material change, but we're working through that in order to understand what the costs and opportunities are. The remainder of the projects are pretty much on time in terms of where we wanted them to be. Rats and mice in terms of the smaller programs, but the Papamoa Eastern interchange, as you saw, is now up and running, and delighted with the approach from the contractor. They're already looking at works they can bring forward in order to de-risk program and ensure that our speed of spend is on time. Next slide, please.
They've got good weather. I mean, they must have had good construction weather as against this time last year.
I think the benefit of having a contractor down there that knows the environment is that they've already spotted some of the restrictions that are put on us regarding paving and surfacing, that they know that they'll get the ambient temperatures they need in order to be able to operate. A couple of other risks have cropped up in that space. The batching plant for asphalt now is only allowed to operate for 12 hours a day, and we see that as a key risk. So what's a risk is also an opportunity. We'll be looking at how we can unlock that in order to create a bit of an incentive, both for the Higgins crew and for the HEB crew. But it's not something that we were aware of at the time of contract, so it just needs to be addressed. It's a risk that at the moment that will carry under legislation because it's not the contractor's risk. We've talked about Cameron Road already today. It's green on time for what we're delivering under the committed work programme. We need to get it up to board so that can get approved. Tauranga West in enabling work. I was delighted that the contractor took the time to come and see me last week. The commercial director of Downers came all the way to Tauranga in order to see me as the sponsor, rather than working through NZTA with the specific intent of discussing the incentives program. A lot of the incentives in the contract are standard NZTA requirements, and they're a bit soft for what we're trying to achieve. So we're looking at how much risk can be incurred jointly by the sponsor and the contractor by accelerating the program now that it's been set. Marty, you may remember that we talked about what can you do with the minister, and while it's sometimes over-ambitious to go fast at the beginning, once the contractor is set in and started, that's where we need to pull some levers in order to get them to actually accelerate. The contractor made it very clear on Tauranga, their objective is to get done and get out They see the suite of work that's coming up in the region as the opportunity not to hang out Tauranga for as long as possible, which was encouraging. Papamoa East interchange on time, on budget. Contractors, final contracts are all with the contractor. We don't have anything out of the ordinary to report in that program. Next slide, please. Torrent Road and 15th, whilst we're still on time for the business case, we have had to de-scope in conjunction with the draft GPS. We've been through that. I've met with the iwi representatives personally in order to demonstrate to them how we will come up with a solution which will offer the Welcome Bay connection, a walking and cycling alternative. It just won't run as a part of the primary contract now. Between meetings this morning and this afternoon, I've been through the first cut options on how we might do Turret Road Bridge. And we're considering both, whilst maintaining the white terns nesting requirements, we are considering a big bang closure versus keeping a variety of lane configurations open to manage disruption. But it's a very drawn out process if we just work at night. Just slotting the new beams in order to facilitate a clip-on is likely to take 40 days and nights. So I've challenged the team and said we need to consider what a big bang closure would look like. If we could do that in maybe 10 days, then we need to bring that back and offer that as a demonstrated consideration. I'm also looking for the cost implications of what a big bang scenario would look like rather than doing it over a drawn out period. Then the idea of working at nights is good for the daytime morning peak, but the noise carries right across the estuary, so it's not going to be quiet when you consider that we've got to slide in 10.5 metre new beams below the bridge. So whilst we do the best, we already know it's going to be a disruption. So I'm expecting to come back with an options paper on what Turret Road would look like. And connecting Mount Maunganui, as discussed earlier today, bringing forward the smaller horizons and leading the discussion has been supported by the NZTA partners. We just want to make sure that we understand where the cost, risk, liability sits before we get too far. Any questions?
The Turret Road, I think we discussed last time, making sure that side road connection is considered as part of the long term, but in the meantime, we're going to open that up. Is that correct? I can't think of the name.
Turret Road.
On the 15th they have Turret Road. Yeah, that slip road that comes down that's currently just for buses from the marae, from the Haerini marae. So understand that that's going to be considered as part of the major, but we're also going to do something in the meantime.
Yep. Well, look, we're still in the business case. The 3-laning tidal system is still under review for scale of benefit, but that ties in exactly with what you're talking about regarding how the lanes all come together for the morning and evening peak. The business case is not concluded, but it is with you next week. In order for the final numbers and reviews of benefit. Now that we've taken out the walking and silent component of stage 3, then obviously it's a smaller project, but getting the benefits realised and being able to demonstrate them in that environment is a challenge. So we're trying hard in order to be able to write the story so that we fall in line with the draft GPS, and we have the support of the NZTA from the outset, rather than going into battle over something which makes common sense to capitalise on the full width of corridor.
Any questions? Pretty impressive workload across the organisation. Good to see a lot of green. Thanks very much now.
I just thought on the wider program, I just wanted to do a shout out to the low cost, low risk safety team. That's a $30 million program now from a standing start a couple of years ago. We didn't expect to get much through the last National Land Transport Plan, but we did in the end. And having a turnover of that now, delivering just a vast range of improvements across the network is really, really impressive. And it took a couple of years planning. So this is sort of the first year where we're actually seeing the fruits of that. So, and also now trying really hard for the shift in GPS not to have too big an impact on what we can actually deliver for the community. But there's a lot of work goes in there. And also another thing I wanted to mention is the network outcomes team. We've struggled with bitumen supply and for our maintenance contractors to keep up with what we're actually wanting to do. So by being very agile in that space, having had lots of various contractors involved with delivering our program, the teams have done a great job of pulling all of that together. So hats off to those two teams especially.
Just to support what Nick was just saying, one of the programs we're running within the program is about the future demand of things like materials, labour, resources generally. The NZT have committed to working with us in terms of a full resource-drawn demand graph. So I think that's why we're getting a bit more interest from the larger contractors, because when we talk about the scale of the 26 to 29 program, there is potentially the opportunity to show there is a requirement for more plants, more competition in the region, and more commitment. So we are actually trying to do that as a region rather than just doing that as local satellite teams within the organisation.
Thanks for that, Neil. It's helpful. Yep. Anything else from anyone? So we've just received the capital program for the third quarter update 23-24. Someone like to move that? Thank you, Bill. Second by Stephen. Did someone say the other night that the capital spend in the last 2 years was greater than the capital spend in the previous 10 years?
The last 3 years is greater than the previous 10 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's an enormous change in the organisation. I mean, it's an enormous change in budgeting, but actually it's been delivered by an organisation that, wasn't doing it 4 years ago. Well done, Mr. Chief Executive. It always is a team effort. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to receive that report. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. That brings us to Audit New Zealand's report to the commissioners on the audit of the 23-24 long-term plan. We didn't bring audit here today, as we said thank you very much and goodbye the last time. But we're just receiving that report, and I think, the things that they raised were not a surprise to us. The risks associated with minimal debt headroom, we've struggled with that, and of course the revaluation of the waters didn't help. But bringing the waters back in, of course, it didn't help with that. Uncertainty over delivery of the capital program. I take it that's more about just the sheer size and ability to deliver the program rather than any concerns about the operations of the program. Because as we've just seen, most of it is on track, on time, scale's been contained. And then uncertainty over the external funding sources for the proposed community stadium and the civic precinct. And of course, the community stadium is a long way out in the long-term plan, but the civic precinct is underway. However, they were just what do they call them, noting issues? Emphasis of matter. So they weren't qualifications, but they were just, they're just identifying, I think, the same concerns that we've been identifying. So would someone like to move, has anyone got any questions on it? No. Would someone like to move that we receive that report? Thank you. Stephen and Shad. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. That is it for the public part of the meeting. Would someone like to move that we go into public excluded for the reasons outlined in the agenda? Bill and Stephen, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Stand up. I've got a box here, Bill. I'll bring it back.